I think a big mistake that many people make is they think that Bitcoin is like the latter group of inventions and that we need to keep developing it, we need to keep improving upon it, it's a technology. And I think that's an erroneous perspective. Bitcoin is the wheel, not the automobile.
Those were the wise words of Vijay, a Harvard-educated attorney turned crypto advisor at Gemini and author of Principles of Bitcoin, published by Columbia University Press. Over the next hour, we'll unpack his holistic first principles view of Bitcoin, stripping away any noise, challenging every assumption, and getting back to what really matters. Enjoy the episode. When I'm looking at Amazon and I read Principles of Bitcoin presents a holistic first principles based framework for understanding one of the most misunderstood inventions of our time. What is the most misunderstood thing about Bitcoin that you wish more people could see clearly?
So there's, in psychology, there's a term called semantic satiation, which is when you say the same word over and over again, it loses its meaning. You might have come across that, right? You just say table 100 times, and it won't mean table anymore. It means something. It doesn't mean anything, or it means something different. That's kind of what's happened to Bitcoin. I don't think Bitcoin means it means any number of things to any number of people. And I think what, newcomers will benefit from most is to just stop and ask that fundamental question: what is Bitcoin? Why are we talking about it? Forget about NFTs, forget about Web3, blockchain technology, Ethereum and Dogecoin. Forget about all of that and just come back to basics. Why are we talking about this? And I think, unfortunately, 99% of even people in crypto probably, I've not got very good responses to that question. And so I think that is really what is most misunderstood. It's just this kind of, it's the adulteration, it's the confusion around it with respect to, all sort of, monkey JPEGs on a blockchain, or so I think coming back to basics and asking that first principles question as to why are we talking about it, I think that is kind of where you should start. And I think, coming to your question of what is misunderstood, I think when you ask that question, you will kind of come back to basics and first principles. And you should hopefully, and what I've tried to explain in my book is, you come to see that Bitcoin is really kind of, the digital gold analogy is the best analogy, but it's really this invention an invention that behaves like physical matter in the digital realm. So, if I give you this pen, you have it and I don't have it anymore. The laws of physics prevent you from taking the same pen and giving it to somebody else, right? We don't need a third person sitting here keeping track and saying, oh, Vijay doesn't have it anymore, so he can't give it to somebody else, right? The laws of physics prevent it. You have it now, you're in possession of it, you take it and you walk away. But in the digital realm, if I send you a photo over email, you can forward that, I can forward that same email, the exact photo, to 1,000 other people. And the only way to stop me from doing that is by having an intermediary, someone who's tracking my email and making sure that I don't send it to somebody else. So until Bitcoin, it was not possible to have peer-to-peer transfers of value in the digital world. It was only possible in the physical world when I give you something physical. What Bitcoin achieved was that ability for a peer-to-peer transfer of value in the digital world, which is just ones and zeros. And that's that's the paradigm shifting invention that occurred, right? And so it was the invention of a technology whereby ones and zeros So like stuff in the digital realm behaves like physical matter and is able to be transferred peer to peer without a third party intermediary. And I think that piece, it's so simple, but it is the most misunderstood, and it's just underappreciated, or it's like, yeah, most people don't even know that.
So I understand these principles that you're referring to and how they're misunderstood. And a lot of people have tried to explain these characteristics of Bitcoin. But having said that, what makes you the right person to write a book about Bitcoin, especially when so many have tried to explain these characteristics?
Yeah. So I think because of my background, I come from the traditional finance space, right? I spent 11 years at Goldman Sachs, sort of that's my world. And then I started going down the rabbit hole, and I understood this invention, and yeah, I mean, rest is history. So having come from that space, I feel like I'm well placed to understand the mindset which most people have, and also, like, I mean, my fascination has been with trying to understand why is it so hard for people from the traditional world to understand Bitcoin? What is that big blocker? So I've spent a lot of time thinking about that, and there are many reasons. I think you and I have talked about this a little bit, but I think one of the reasons is just simply people are just lazy. They just don't read. Sort of, a lot of people are just followers. They just sheep. Sort of, they wait for someone else to tell them what to do, and they follow, as we've seen. Sort of during COVID and various other instances in the past, right? So that's one group of people. That's a little hard to kind of really address. There's another group of people who are just, I think, blocked by kind of ego and intellectual arrogance to some degree, particularly people from my world. If you're from, like you're a hedge fund manager, or or a private equity fund owner, and you've made millions, maybe billions of dollars in your successful, illustrious career, you're not going to take very well to someone coming and telling you, you know what, you have missed the greatest monetary asset of our generation, right? You're going to find some excuse, some reason why it's not. And, your model for success is the right model. So there's that. There's a lot of that kind of just kind of closed-mindedness and arrogance about, just opening your mind up and to the possibility that you might have missed something. So there's a lot of that. And I think we talked about this, the point, there's a meme that Bitcoin is an IQ test. And I always say it's not. I don't think it's an IQ test. You don't need any great intelligence to understand Bitcoin. All you need is curiosity and an open mind and the intellectual humility to say that, you know what, I might have missed something here. So I'm going to spend the time and the effort to try to understand this. And it takes serious effort. It takes a lot of reading, a lot of introspection, a lot of reflection in order to actually grasp the gravity of the invention, right? So there's that. So I came to answer your question. I think I came to the problem was that I was trying to address or solve was, why are these people missing it, and how can I address that? How can I, write something, produce some sort of work or material that really hits them, that kind of gets them or speaks their language. So that was my goal. So I wanted it to be published by, a leading publisher. So I got Columbia University Press to publish it, because people look for credentials, and sort of, if you're from the old school of, TradFi, you're Ivy League, and, sort of you pick it up and you read it rather than something that's self-published. It's just how the world works, right? So I did that, and I structured it in a very formal, kind of almost academic, PhD thesis style of writing, very well referenced, and I've tried to back up all my claims as much as I could in a very academic manner. So I did that. But I think structurally my main kind of contribution, I think, is this holistic perspective of Bitcoin, which I don't think has been written about before. Like I said, there've been plenty of books, and podcast recordings, thousands of hours have been produced, sort of trying to describe what Bitcoin is. But I don't think people have really captured it from all these multidisciplinary dimensions that I try to capture it, talking about its politics, its economics, its technology, and its philosophy, right? And my point in taking that holistic approach was that, the whole is greater than the sum of its parts. The human mind is geared to understand things holistically rather than in silos. When you look at the big picture, you get it. It's the story of the blind man and the elephant, right? I'm sure you've heard that before. Have you heard that?
No, please
I think
refresh my memory.
There are these four blind men, or 4 or 5 blind men, and they come across an elephant, and each blind man, feels a different part of the elephant and then tries to describe what it is. So one man feels the tail of the elephant and he says, "Oh, the elephant is a rope." And another man feels the legs of the elephant and he says, "Oh, the elephant is a tree trunk." The other man feels, the trunk of the elephant and he says, "Oh, the elephant is a snake." Another man feels the ear of the elephant. He says, "The elephant is a fan," right? But you need, it's only when so that's kind of, when you look at it in a silo, if you look at just its technology, then you miss its political relevance. You miss its relevance to people who are struggling in authoritarian regimes where, the financial system, the banking system has completely failed them. It's been completely captured, right? They have no recourse whatsoever except Bitcoin, right? It's arguably the most powerful invention ever, the most powerful tool that people have ever had to resist authoritarian regimes. But you have to think about that. You have to study it to really understand that, right? But if you just focus on the technology, C++ code, you're going to miss that. You're going to say, "Hey, okay, C++ coder, I'm going to move on to the next, faster technology, blockchain," and, sort of you just get lost. You don't understand the whole, the other relevance. And if you look at the price charts, right, volatility, and you get obsessed with that without understanding monetary history, the history of money and central banking, then you're not going to understand how Bitcoin disrupts central banking, which is its primary target disruption, right? And if you focus on all these other things, then you're probably not going to get the philosophy of Bitcoin, which is, privacy, the importance of privacy, the importance of self-sovereignty, So it's kind of like, only when you look at it, my argument is that only when you look at it holistically, you get it. And it's like the blind men all of a sudden gain their sight back and they could see that it's in fact not a rope or a fan, but it's actually an elephant. That's the idea.
So you mentioned that a lot of people in TradFi miss it. You mentioned that unless you're looking at it from all of these different perspectives, you're not really getting the main picture here. But for you, what was that moment where Bitcoin became personal and not just interesting, but the moment where it became necessary?
So I think, so I've come at this from a gold bug sort of thing. So I understood monetary history and the problems with central banking and monetary policy way back in 2008. I was a lawyer, I was an attorney in New York during the 2008 financial crisis, and I could see how the system was broken. And in the immediate aftermath, I bought a lot of gold in 2009 and 2010. But if you look at the gold's price charts, that was the worst decade that followed. I mean, equities went up, gold just stayed flat or went down. So I was languishing in my gold investment, but I understood the problems of the system, and I understood that, we needed a fix. We needed a solution. I thought it was gold. And then when I understood Bitcoin, after initially criticizing it and calling it a Ponzi scheme and, all of this used by criminals and all of that, once I finally got it, it was an easy leap when I saw that, oh, this is gold 2.0. It takes all the positive properties of gold and improves on them. The moment I understood that, it was an easy leap for me. And so I initially came at it as an investment. But to your point about the moment when it went beyond being an investment was, there's some, writers in the space, like there's one pseudonymous writer called Gigi. I don't expect you to have come across him. He's quite a, an esoteric kind of writer. But there's one paper that he wrote, which is available online. It's called Bitcoin is Time. Again, it's not something you read as a 101. It's something you graduate to. But that paper was for me a moment when I started seeing it more as more than just an investment, and I understood how powerful it was. I understood its true censorship resistance. I understood particularly its political relevance for people struggling for people for whom the entire system has failed. So it was no longer, at that point, it was no longer, oh, what kind of return am I going to make on this? It was like, okay, this actually has incredibly significant societal implications. And so that was the moment for me when it went beyond being just, like another stock that's going to produce a good return for me.
But do you think that you're mentioning all of these great characteristics and ways that it's better than gold, but do you think that Bitcoin is truly unstoppable, even in a world where you have governments that are coordinating against it, although it seems like not as much these days, but then you also have the risk of quantum. What do you think about these risks surrounding Bitcoin?
So I think there's great irony in people saying that, people worrying about governments attacking Bitcoin and rejoicing that governments are, supporting it, or the president of the United States is now supporting Bitcoin, and therefore it's been de-risked. If you believed that Bitcoin would succumb to a governmental attack, it means Bitcoin has failed, right? Because you have to understand that Bitcoin was created to withstand government attacks, to withstand coordinated government attacks. It was always assumed that governments will attack Bitcoin. In fact, if you look at some of the earliest writings of Satoshi, he talks about how, I think one of his quotes is, if you look at Napster, like all centralized networks like Napster have been shut down by governments. Governments cut their heads off. I think that's what he says. However, decentralized networks like Tor and Nutella have been holding their own. That's what he says. So he was talking about that. He was talking about, creating something that cannot be stopped by governments. Because if you are creating a disruption of central banking, you have to assume that the governments and central banks are going to attack you. They're going to fight back, right? And if you're going to succumb to that and die, then there was no point in the first place. So it's important to understand that, right? And therefore, I mean, when I see the president, Trump and governments talking about it, okay, nice. It doesn't make me think about Bitcoin any differently. In fact, I expected a harsher fight before people came to this realization. I thought it would take many more years, but we seem to have gone from a little bit of an attack to complete, okay, we bow down and we're going to buy Bitcoin for the balance sheet sort of thing. So that's the first point I'll make is that it was always assumed that it will be attacked. So this is nothing new to be worried about, right? Now, yeah, how would it actually respond to an attack? Now, this is not hypothetical, right? It's been attacked. It was banned in China. It was banned in Nigeria, right? What happened in all of these places? What happened in Nigeria when Bitcoin was banned?
Well, I know
Everyone,
the mining activity, if I recall, Vijay, the mining activity went down for it took a drastic dip, but then it gradually climbed back up
yeah,
as
you're talking about
it,
China, right?
yeah.
Yeah. So let's come to mining. Mining is a separate point. You're absolutely right. That again proves how, it was a complete shutdown. There was like 80% of mining pools were in China. They were all shut down overnight. The hash rate fell, the price fell, and everyone was calling it's dead and it's over. And then it just decentralized. It moved to the US, it moved to Kazakhstan, it moved to various other, kind of countries that were friendly towards it, and thereby demonstrating its robustness. Um, but, um, but the other thing at the transactional level, what happens is when you ban it, people move to the peer-to-peer level, right? And that's the key point. Bitcoin resides, it sort of uses the TCP/IP protocol on the internet. That's the base protocol of the internet. You cannot shut that down unless you shut down the internet itself, which is an inconceivable thing to do. Your nation would have to shut down the internet to shut down Bitcoin. But then going a step further, even if you did that, that won't stop Bitcoin, because you can actually transact in Bitcoin using SMS messages, using ham radio. There's satellites, Blockstream satellites. So it's literally impossible to stop Bitcoin from a functional perspective. Okay. So that's the second point I'll make these governments are going to ban Bitcoin. And there's a whole chapter on that, by the way, in my book. The third point is, it's really, you take the US. Oh, actually, I'll mention sort of, and there's also like political game theory, right? Like if one country bans it, you think it's really conceivable that every country on the planet will ban Bitcoin in a coordinated way? That's inconceivable. Because there will always be holdout nations. There'll always be some state that says, oh, you know what? I'm going to, like all the big nations have banned Bitcoin. I'm going to permit Bitcoin, and I'm going to attract all these billions of dollars of Bitcoin money, and I'm going to become Singapore or Switzerland overnight, right? There'll always be countries like that. And you take El Salvador, they're never going to ban. They've made it legal tender. Bitcoin will always be legal in El Salvador. The president has made it legal tender, which president, by the way, has like a 90% approval rating. Bitcoin is never getting banned in El Salvador. So it will always kind of, and if every other nation banned it, like I said, El Salvador is going to be Switzerland 2.0. And then do you think neighboring Costa Rica and Guatemala are just going to be sitting by and watching their neighbor get rich? They're going to say, okay, we're going to allow Bitcoin as well. So there's that game theory aspect as well. So the idea that the suggestion of a global coordinated, attack is frankly ludicrous at this point. And then the final point I'll make is that even in the US, the horse has left the barn. Right? It is too late to ban Bitcoin in the US. Okay. You've got ETFs approved by the Securities Exchange Commission of the United States for retail investors, right? That means when the SEC, approves an ETF for retail distribution, they're basically saying anyone, grandma next door can buy a Bitcoin ETF, right? And they have, right? It's now in retirement accounts, it's in pension funds. Something like 30% of American adults have some Bitcoin exposure. Do you really think it's politically tenable, at this point in time? The president of the United States has, sort of said, you never sell your Bitcoin. So if they banned it now, and then there's legal basis. I mean, it's like you challenge it as unconstitutional. There's the Fourth Amendment, you should not be deprived of, property without due process of law. It would be in breach of that. You can challenge it under that. First Amendment, free speech, right? Bitcoin is literally just code. You and I sending code back and forth. Code is speech. right? You can't ban that. There's a First Amendment case there. There's a Fourth Amendment. There's a, legitimate, expectation of privacy. If someone's going to take your private keys and confiscate your Bitcoin, it's impossible. I mean, I can tell you at this point, it's literally impossible. Anyway, that's a very long-winded answer, but I to me, it still surprises me that people still talk about government bans, because it's kind of like hilarious at this point.
Well, Vijay, you mentioned about having self-awareness, reflection, and in order to understand Bitcoin. But if I was to ask you to step outside of your own body and have a conversation with yourself and have a complete 180 argument, what would you say is that one thing that could potentially stop Bitcoin?
So, you ask any Bitcoiner, Bitcoiners are the most paranoid people in the world. Okay. I mean, if you know the Bitcoin community, you'll know that. And it's a cultural thing as well, right? Bitcoin, don't trust, verify culture, the whole cypherpunk culture, encourages that skepticism, kill your heroes, only trust yourself, kind of, and be paranoid about everything. So we ask ourselves this question all the time. I've asked it, million times probably over several years, right? And of course, when writing a book, I ask myself that question repeatedly. I have an entire chapter, How Do You Kill Bitcoin? And I go through every single, potential avenue. The only thing I'll say is, there is one way that Bitcoin fails and completely disappears. And you know what that is? That is if governments, central banks became completely responsible. They didn't increase the money supply at all. And there was no more inflation. There were no more bailouts. There was no more manipulation of free markets. There was no more, moral hazard that's being introduced by the, kind of quantitative easing and all of that. If you understand the current fiscal and monetary situation in the US and globally, and you think that's even remotely feasible, then sure, don't, then Bitcoin's not for you. But yeah, I think that's the only scenario. So if dollars all of a sudden became absolutely scarce, because that's what Bitcoin is. Bitcoin is, an absolutely scarce digital asset that is uninflatable, unconfiscatable, and, all uncensorable and all of that. So if dollars all of a sudden offered all those properties, I would agree with you. I think the case for Bitcoin disappears.
Let's touch on the fiat system. I mean, do you think that it's fundamentally broken? You mentioned that, sure, if the governments miraculously can figure out how to not have inflation, then, we wouldn't have some of these problems. But is it just broken at the fundamental level, or is it just going through a crisis?
So what I think it's surprisingly surprisingly small percentage of society actually is aware that fiat, the money that we think is money and we store our life savings in it, is actually just a 50-year-old experiment. Okay, it's 1971. It's the Nixon shock in 1971 when Nixon abandoned the gold standard in Bretton Woods, right? That is when fiat was born. It's just 54 years old. I mean, Bitcoin now is what, 17 years old. I mean, it's not that far off, right? Fiat is it's a little blip in history, right? But most people don't understand that. They don't, nor are we even aware of such things. They don't ask these. Again, you need to ask first principles questions, right? And so that's the first point. It's not like this is a 2,000-year-old tradition of money that's now being disrupted or something. No, it's literally just 54 years old. So, I mean, is it broken? I think you just look at the numbers, look at look at the debt figures. You think about things like, put aside the was $40 trillion national, US debt. According to Stan Druckenmiller, if you include, pension liabilities in the US, you're looking at a debt in excess of $100 trillion over the next 15 to 20 years, right? Where is that money going to come from? It's not going to come out of productivity. It has to be printed, right? It has to be through quantitative easing. And that just means monetary debasement. And so it's mathematical. That's why people say it's not some theory. It's not a belief. It's literally it's just mathematics. There is no way out of this. And it's not like you blame people. I don't think that people have been malicious about it. I don't think central banks have been malicious about it. I don't think Nixon was malicious when the gold standard was abandoned in 1971. He had no choice. That those were the cards he was dealt, right? It's just a gradual progression of things through history that have led to where we are today. And so the system is broken and will break further. And I think we have reached that kind of tipping point or this kind of escape velocity since COVID. Because if you look at the trajectory of the rate at which the debt is growing, another very crucial event occurred in 2022, when Russia attacked Ukraine, and the U.S. froze Russia's foreign reserves, right? If you look at foreign central bank holdings of U.S. treasuries versus holdings of gold from that point to today, it's almost like you've got gold going up, kind of to the roof, and this plummeting of U.S. treasuries. I think just today, actually, the FT reported that gold is now the second largest, reserve asset. It's overtaken the euro. It's over 20. It's like the highest. It's about 25% or something like that. It's the highest, literally, since the Nixon era. And US dollars has fallen to the lowest level since, I think, the early 90s or the 80s. It's at 44% or something like that. So changes are afoot right now. You'd have to be really, kind of ignorant or like oblivious of reality to not be seeing that. So yeah, I mean, I'm not just a firm believer. I mean, I'm convinced that the fiat system is broken. As Lynn Alden says, nothing stops this train. I think that's what she's trying to illustrate, is that it doesn't matter who's in power. It doesn't matter if it's Trump or Biden, or it's just a question of how fast things accelerate from here. It cannot be fixed. Nothing stops this train, is her point. We are headed to a particular destination. And it's ironic, right? You had Trump and Elon Musk come in and talk about, Doge and cleaning up and saving trillions of dollars and all of that. I think they ended up, some estimates are that they've saved about less than $5 billion or something like that, if you look at actual receipts, but maybe it's in the tens of billions of dollars. And now they're passing this tax bill that's going to add, $2 trillion to the deficit or national debt, I forget. So it's completely, it doesn't matter. We are headed to one destination, and it's pretty clear, the writing's on the wall.
To your point, fiat system has gone through changes, and 1971 was a pivotal point. And then, of course, during COVID, that was definitely a point where we expedited the process of inflation and just money printing. And also Bitcoin has also gone through changes. When it first was formed, it was a peer-to-peer system, primarily way to transfer money. Now it's more of a store of value. Where do you feel like we transition next?
Yeah, no, that's again, I think, a complete misnomer. That's not true at all. That's completely not true. Nothing has changed about Bitcoin. Nothing, literally. And all you have to do is to go back to those original emails and writings of Satoshi, and you will see what he is talking about, what he was trying. Again, Satoshi didn't say, okay, MasterCard and Visa are not working very well, and so I want to create something that disrupts that. That was never, he wasn't trying to create a better payment technology, right? Saifuddin has this nice quote. He says, using Bitcoin for consumer purchases is the equivalent of driving a Concorde jet down the street to pick up groceries. It's a far more powerful tool, and talking about purchases, coffee purchases, and so on so it was always, and by the way, if payments was the problem, if this peer-to-peer transfers was what he was solving, why would he have created a 10-minute block time? So Satoshi was trying to disrupt central banking. He was trying to create gold 2.0. And that is abundantly clear in all of his writings. Even if you look at the architecture of Bitcoin, there's so many clues in there about, gold, right? And particularly 6102, the Article 6102, or Order 6102, which is FDR's order to confiscate gold holdings in the U.S. During the Great Depression. So what Satoshi was trying to create was an unconfiscatable gold, and there's various kind of clues in Bitcoin's architecture. For example, the block reward, the block difficulty, the hashing difficulty resets every 2016 blocks, which is 6102 in reverse, right? Satoshi's birthday is April 5th, which is the date of Order 6102 passed by FDR. It's kind of like a fictitious, sort of birthday that he gave himself. That's what he was doing. So nothing has changed. Again, it was, gold is a store of value. He wanted to create an unconfiscatable store of value, like a new form of money that disrupts central banking. And so, again, I will maintain that nothing has changed since the very day that the white paper was published.
But the perception
Sure.
was different at the time, right? Despite the fact that Satoshi created it a certain way. Because if that was not the perception, then we wouldn't have Bitcoin Pizza Day, right?
I don't think that necessarily detracts from it. It's just, okay, sure, you can look, what Bitcoin does is the whole point of gold 2.0 is it takes all the positive properties of gold and enhances them, and takes the negative properties of gold and solves them, right? Now, you look at the history of fiat. Why did fiat come about? It was because of the constraints of gold. One of the constraints of gold was transactability, portability, divisibility, right? Verifiability. It's very difficult to transport gold. You have to put it in a ship and, send it across the world. It's very difficult to divide gold. You can't pay for, like a coffee with gold. You can't take a little sliver of gold and hand it over. It's not possible. It's not divisible. And that's why paper gold evolved, right? So you had gold-backed receipts. That was the first form of the gold standard, right? And then that's where the corruption of money began. You had gold, then you had gold-backed paper, and then you did away with the gold and you just had paper, right? That's kind of the progression of fiat. But if you take Bitcoin solves all those problems. It's portable, it's divisible, it's verifiable, it solves all those problems. So by solving those problems, it makes the original rationale for fiat redundant, right? And therefore, Bitcoin Pizza Day was very important in order to demonstrate that, hey, you can actually use it for transactions. Hey, you can actually, divide it. It's solved divisibility. So here's gold that has solved all these other problems that paper gold was solving. So that's kind of part of that. I think that's where it's relevant. But to me, at least, and I think, it was always about that gold, the scarcity and the gold thesis. And I think the idea that it has changed its narrative along the way it's just not correct. But by the way, that view is very widely held, particularly by mainstream media. And I think it's a total misnomer.
So how do you view the relationship between Bitcoin and fiat? Because we obviously need to survive, and in order to do so, we need to exchange some form of payment in order to have that done. Is it
Sure.
something else? Are we going to
I
continue
mean,
to use Bitcoin for that
yeah, I mean,
specific?
yeah, you were at the Bitcoin conference, right? Did you try any Lightning payments? If we had spent more time together, I would have shown you it. I mean, it takes a couple of minutes to download a wallet. And then, yeah, deposit some Bitcoin there. Of course, you need to buy the Bitcoin. That's the little step you need to do. But once you do that, you fund your Lightning wallet, and then you just go to a terminal, just like you do a PayWave or something. You just kind of scan a QR code and pay the invoice, and it's instantaneous. It is as fast as using a credit card or any other form of payment. So it's completely tried. You don't even, not even the 10-minute block time is a constraint any longer, because Lightning has solved that, and it's private transactions, peer to peer, and it's Bitcoin, right? And there's various other L2s are layer 2 technologies that solve for immediate transactability, right? So yeah, people will move into that over time. But I think this is what, there's Vijay Boyapati, who is another, great author in the Bitcoin space. He, I think, was one of the first people who kind of really articulated this way. But a currency or a money goes through different phases of adoption, right? It's not just going to like become money overnight. So, and the phases that he describes, and I've talked about it as well in the book, is it starts off as a collectible, right? And then it goes through that. People think it's unique, it's scarce, and I'm going to collect some of it because it might appreciate in value. After a while, then it moves into the store of value. Like if enough people think, yeah, it's scarce and it's, people are going to be able to sell it for a high price later, then you move into a store of value kind of space. And then that, you spend some time there. Then once it's really established itself as a store of value and people have gained confidence in it as a store of value, then you move to the next stage, which is a medium of exchange. It's only then that you move to medium of exchange. And then finally, if it's fully established itself as a medium of exchange, then it becomes a unit of account. At that point, you stop thinking in dollars, you just think in Bitcoin, right? So, but it needs to progress through these phases, and that's not going to happen overnight. It's not going to happen even over a few years. It's probably a multi-decade, process. We are now in the very early, we've passed collectible, and I'd say we are very, very, very early stages of the store of value. So it needs to really kind of get adopted as store of value. And then I think people will really start using it more and more as a medium of exchange, because it's Gresham's law, right? Gresham's law is that, Gresham's law or Tier's law. I get confused. They're the opposite of each other, but one of them is, people will typically spend the bad money and hoard the good money. So when you had gold and silver, people spent silver and hoarded gold because gold was more scarce and more valuable. And so I think we're possibly going through that phase now where people don't want to spend their Bitcoin because they know, why would you spend your Bitcoin when it's appreciated at 100% per annum, right? You'd spend your dollars because Bitcoiners perceive gold, Bitcoin as more valuable and, a better store of value. So it's going through that phase right now. People are spending the bad money. But we'll transcend this phase into, move into the next phase of medium of exchange at some point. I don't think anyone knows when, but I think it will happen.
So let's look at a 20-year horizon. Obviously, we're not going to the grocery store and buying things in Satoshis, but what do you see 20 years from now around Bitcoin and just how we move money around?
I mean, I think it will, a lot will determine on what happens to the dollar. Is this what we're witnessing right now with the spiraling debt, spiraling deficits, in tandem with foreign governments downsizing their treasury and dollar holdings and moving away from the dollar and moving to gold and all of that. How that plays out, that can spiral very, very quickly. in which case I think, maybe in 5 years, we could be in a very, very different paradigm where maybe gold takes center stage first, and then people learn more about Bitcoin and they understand that actually Bitcoin is better than gold. So maybe that's how things play out. You go from fiat to gold and then from gold to Bitcoin. I don't know how, no one can predict how things are going to play out. But I think in 20 years, I mean, Bitcoin's market cap will be significantly higher. I think it will be used far more widely as a medium of exchange. It could be Lightning, it could be some other, layer 2 protocol. But yeah, the extent to which that happens, I think, will be determined by what happens in our fiat world.
You mentioned the Lightning Network and other L2s. What are your thoughts on the development of the actual Bitcoin network? Do you think we need to continue to work on it, or is it good the way that it is right now?
So in my book, I have this concept of a foundational invention. What are foundational inventions? And I think I might have come up with that term. I don't know if it existed prior to this, but I was thinking about, if you think about all inventions, and you try to differentiate inventions, so you think about the wheel, right? The wheel as an invention was complete and timeless from inception, right? You can have a wheel in a different, in metal and wood and rubber or whatever. But the concept of the wheel and the axle and so on, it was complete at inception. And I call that a foundation invention, right? The magnetic compass, we use the same principles today, right? The nail, right? The nail was invented by the Egyptians, I think, 5,000 years ago to join two pieces of wood, right? That was an invention. That was a foundational invention. We still use nails. I use, nails to put, things up on my wall, right? I consider those foundational inventions. Now, you think about other types of inventions. So you think about, by contrast, the automobile, right? Carl Benz came up with some concept of an automobile, for the first time. And then Ford came up with the assembly line. And there've been all sorts of iterations over the decades, and we've now landed up with, self-driving cars and EV and, kind of all of that. It's constantly evolving, right? There was never a foundational invention there. It's just an amorphous kind of space that evolves with time. You take computers, right? There's almost nothing, the computer, the laptop, whatever you're looking into right now has nothing in common with the original, kind of computer, the personal computer. Cell phones, like these things are just constantly evolving. There's no real foundation invention there. Now, I think a big mistake that many people make is they think that Bitcoin is like the latter group of inventions, and that we need to keep developing it. We need to keep improving upon it. It's a technology. Otherwise, it's going to get outdated and all these things, right? And I think that's an erroneous perspective. Bitcoin is the wheel, not the automobile. And by that, now this will probably get a lot of hate on Twitter or something if this clip is posted, because people will say, or, sort of all the devs at Bitcoin Core and so on and so forth. The point, I'm not talking about incremental changes. I'm not talking about, making it more programmable or whatever. I'm very skeptical of such changes, but that's not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about the core invention, which is digital scarcity, right? That invention was complete and timeless at inception, and you cannot change that. And so I don't really care too much about whether we're doing ordinals and inscriptions and we are putting stuffing stuff, kind of, data into signature, sort of, parts of the block. That doesn't bother me a great deal, because to me the core invention, which is digital scarcity, is done, and it's actually impossible to change that. I don't think it's possible to change that. So I don't even care about people trying to change stuff, because here's the funny thing: if they could change it, Bitcoin was never worth, its salt anyway. So it's kind of like so you cannot change it. you cannot change those foundational, fundamental properties of Bitcoin.
As you were writing this book, Vijay, and putting together all of your thoughts and all of your understandings about Bitcoin, about the history of money, what surprised you most during the process of writing this book?
Actually, I mean, I was surprised at how fast I wrote it, actually. Mainly, sort of I realized that if you're really passionate about something, and you just kind of get into that flow state, then you just kind of write it. And I think, it's a 320-page book, but I actually think that I wrote 60% of it in about a month when I was just so immersed in it and just kind of writing and just, obsessively about it. So yeah, that was quite surprising to me as to how fast it got produced in the end. But if you're asking me about Bitcoin, what I learned, I think it surprised, like, I had thought that I completely understood Bitcoin when I started writing the book. And it surprised me that while writing it, there were still so many moments when it just kept blowing my mind over and over again. I thought I'd been mind blown many years prior, and then I got it and I understood it. But, while writing it and reading stuff and thinking about it, I kept being mind blown over and over again. And that, I thought that was surprising to me. And it made me realize that, people talk about the Bitcoin rabbit hole and no one's ever reached the bottom of the rabbit hole. We're all on that journey, downward. And it made me realize that there's still so much more to learn about its meaning. And I'm not talking about the code and it's like, I'm talking about, it's just the game theory around it, the societal, the incentive structures, what it means to humanity, and how things are going to play out, its robustness, its censorship resistance, its permissionlessness. What will it mean for society? What does it mean for violence, between, in society, right? If all wealth were dematerialized, what does that mean for society? There's so many kind of ramifications and repercussions from, its evolution and development.
Well, you've certainly opened up my eyes to looking at Bitcoin from a lot of different perspectives. And next time I turn on YouTube or a podcast and I'm watching the charts, I'm going to be thinking about your book and thinking, well, you're only looking at it from one lens. So, yes. Vijay, this was a real pleasure. Where can people buy your book?
It's on Amazon or on the Columbia University Press website. So if you just Google it, you'll see it, Principles of Bitcoin. Yeah.
Absolutely. I'll be sure to include those links in the description along with your profile on Twitter. Vijay, looking forward to talking to you again in the near future.
Likewise. I really enjoyed that. And thank you very much.